Okay, go ahead.
Quick question. With Putin in Syria, does he have a strategic interest actually, or was it more a political play to just sort of a power play to sort of establish his influence, keep his influence in the region? Or does he have actual strategic interest in keeping the side in power?
Right. It's kind of both. One, it's definitely a power play. Definitely, Putin loves to stick it to the U.S. whenever he can, just kind of on principle, or lack of principle in his case. I think that Putin very much likes to strut on the world stage. He likes to make it seem like Russia is still this world power that it is not. He has the Olympics coming up, so he's strutting on that too. But his role with Assad is one of also some strategic value. It's overblown, it's exaggerated, but there is the idea that Russia as a partner was this long-standing Cold War partner to Syria. Syria was always in the Soviet camp, and so Russia is using that as a way to sort of show that we stand by our allies, whereas the U.S., you can see, they have abandoned you, and this kind of thing. This is very much in the way Putin likes to talk. But I will say, Russia cannot sustain a military presence in the Middle East for any duration of time. They can't afford it. They do not have the capacity to sustain that. They do not have the capacity, to put another way, to replace the United States in the Middle East. If we continue to pull back, they will not be able to fill that void. That void will be filled by Saudi, Iran, Qatar, etc. It will not be filled by Russia. They cannot do that. But they want to appear as if they will be the reliable broker. They will sell weapons to anyone. They will give weapons to whoever. They will be the one who give oil and ammunition and whatever to whoever, and will be counted on to give weapons to whoever asks for it. This is Russia's sort of thinking, but it's also Putin being very much on the world stage, striding on the world stage, attempting to show off and hide the fact that his country is dying. I mean, Russia is dying. The average age the average lifespan of a Russian male is 60 years. 25% of the country is alcoholic. The healthcare system is destroyed. The education system is destroyed. If you have a degree and you're 18 years old, you leave. The brain drain is phenomenal. So that's what the Olympics is about. That's what his strutting is about. That's what all this is about. It's him concealing the fact of the horror that Russia is right now, the desperate, real desperate straits it in. If it didn't have natural gas and oil coming out of Caspian, it would have nothing. It would be nothing. And so that's what it has. It's a third world country with nuclear weapons, and it has to be dealt with in a certain way because of that. But no, it cannot replace, and it's very much more what he said. It's the power play that he's trying to do to kind of aggrandize himself on the international stage. So now we're going to go to Egypt. Okay, how much time have I got? Just so I know. Oh boy. Okay. This was the long section too, by the way. Okay, so we're going to just go through this really fast. I just want you to see this is the modern creation of Egypt. And we had the British occupation in the 19th century all the way to 53. But in that time period, there were different categories of occupation. All that time, British had influence. But there was a time when it was a Sultanate of Egypt. That collapsed and was put a kingdom in charge. And that kingdom was hand-picked people by Britain, was put there in charge. And this was all the way it worked until 53, when the military took over, kicked out the British, or asked them to leave, and nationalized the Suez Canal. All this kind of thing happened under Nasser, and that was the Nasser era. We had this new development, and then in 56, there was actually so much independence and so much this thrust of independence by Egypt that France and England tried to actually squash it and tried to actually reinvade Egypt, and they got Israel roped into the whole thing. And all of this was stopped. It was basically, there was a war, but it was basically stopped by Russia and the United States basically saying, no, you can't do this, and telling everybody to go home. But in 56, there was this brief war where Israel, France, and England all basically tried to invade or take over Egypt again, and they were going to divide it up, but it didn't happen. And then we had, from 58 to 71, was this United Arab Republic. That was what Egypt called it. It actually broke down in the 60s, but Egypt still called itself that for a while. And then they had the 67 war with Israel, which I already talked about, which was basically Israel destroyed the entire Egyptian Air Force in the first 48 hours of the war. And so from that point on, Egypt was just retreating. So it was quite remarkable victory for Israel in that. And then we had the Sadat era. And Sadat was the one who basically orchestrated. He was also one of the free officers. And he orchestrated this attack on Israel in 73. He was the mastermind behind it. And he was the one who decided that they would attack on Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the Jewish calendar, because most of the troops would be at home with their families. This was all done. It was all calculated. And it was fascinating in the way that 3 times before this war was actually launched, Egypt had done a big drill where they had acted as if they were going to invade Israel, but it was all just a drill. And they did this 3 times before the actual one. And so when the actual one happened, it was very much in the IDF thinking, oh, it's another drill. And it was Yom Kippur. So those 2 things conspired in a way, exactly the way the Egyptians thought they would, and Israel was caught very off guard. And so the Egyptian army pushed deep into Israel territory. It blew past the all front line of Israel forces, because the front line of Israel forces were kids. They were the young kids. They were just there while the veterans were home with their families. The kids have to man the lines. So it was young kids that were actually hit first by this Egyptian attack. And it pushed way deeply, in 73, it pushed deeply, deeply into Israel, but it was pushed back again. The Ariel Sharon tank move that was very famous rebound, and that actually caused it to be what is now considered to be an Israeli victory overall. But Egypt did achieve certain things, which they did achieve, which they convinced Israel that they should sit down and have a peace treaty. And so under President Carter, the Camp David Accords were signed late in 78, and this led to, and you've all seen the handshake picture and all that, Camp David. And then we had the 79 treaty, which was like the following spring in 79, which was actually a full treaty of peace between an Arab state and the state of Israel. This first time that it ever happened. Very, very important. The Jordanian treaty we talked about earlier would never happen if this hadn't happened first. Egypt was kicked out of the Arab League for making this treaty. Sadat was assassinated, primarily, I would say, for making this treaty. There was other problems. He'd also kind of allowed the Brotherhood and some of these Islamic groups a lot more free reign, and so maybe there was something there. There was lots of reasons that he was killed, but one of them definitely was that he had made this treaty. And that gave rise to the Mubarak era, who Mubarak was the vice president at the time. He took power and remained in power for the next 30 years. So and then in January of 11 is when Mubarak was deposed by the military after 2 weeks of protests. So this is kind of how we got to the time period we are. I had to go through that very quickly, but you can ask me questions if anything about that was confusing later. So we'll go to the next slide. So, yeah, click on through this. This is where we are now. We've had this 2 years now of revolution where the Brotherhood was actually elected to the presidency. That's the guy there on the far right there. That's Morsi, Mohammed Morsi. The guy at the top is General Fattah al-Sisi, and he is the one in charge now. He's the one who kicked the Brotherhood out and has assumed power. He's the defense minister and the head of the military. And he has taken the judiciary, made the chief of the Supreme Court to be president as an interim job, and they have rewritten the Constitution. They've selected a group of 50 that rewrote the Constitution for the past 2 months, and now they put this to a referendum that will be happening on the 14th and 15th of this month. So Egypt will be getting a new constitution in about a week. It's better than the one that the Brotherhood had put forth, which had a lot of Islamism in it and a lot of protections for Islamic groups and a lot of non-protections for non-Islamic groups and such things. So that was all taken out, and there's a new constitution. It's not terrible, we can't really see, but it definitely protects the military. The Constitution, we'll have to see how it all works, but it definitely the military is still very much its own sort of state within a state in Egypt. And the judiciary of Egypt, unlike a lot of states, the judiciary is also sort of part of the security apparatus. It's sort of interesting that way, but the judiciary is very much part of the general security apparatus of the state. So it's a unique arrangement, and we'll see where it goes. But basically, the army has really declared war on the Brotherhood. They've crushed them. They've taken all their leadership, put them in jail. They've outlawed them. They declared the Muslim Brotherhood to be a terrorist organization, something that hasn't been called since 1971, by the way. So it's been a while. And they had the constitutional referendum. And now, because of that, and because of the harsh treatment of the Brotherhood, there have been a lot of Islamic groups in the region, or in Egypt, that have actually, who were not really fans of the Brotherhood and didn't support the Brotherhood when they were in power, but now are attacking the army because they feel like, okay, we're next. If they can do that to the Brotherhood, which was actually in power, think what they're going to do to us when we don't have any power. So there's this whole new backlash against this situation here with the army taking power. And it's very, very tense. It's really an ongoing war right now. So go ahead and next. So this is something I wanted to go into more detail. We'll have to go through this pretty quickly, and you can stop me after and ask me if this is confusing. But when we talk about Islam, and you'll talk about this more when you have your Islam session, but there's a term that is being used, and it's in the news, and I want to really kind of give it to you today, and so you'll take it out of here with you. The Salafi thought of Islam. Now, Salafi is where we had a Wahhabi question like Al-Qaeda. What's the core of Al-Qaeda question? Salafi thought is a movement within Islam that's the puritanical movement within Islam. So it's a puritanical critique of all the other Islams, okay? All the other branches are not as good. So if you're Salafi, you're saying, the word actually comes from the term follower, but you're saying, I am an adherent of the first 3 generations of Islam, which was known as the companions, the followers, and the followers of the followers. Those first 3 generations of Islam were considered to be the most orthodox, the most pure, the most true. So if today you call yourself a Salafi, or if you agree with the Salafi teachings, which is a broad movement that covers lots of ground, if you believe that, you are taking a puritanical stance. You are saying, I will adhere to what those 3 generations of Islam did, not the stuff that happened after that. Not all the accoutrement that has developed over time. Not all the worship of saints, not these shrines to people, not that stuff. That's late. That's liturgy. That's not anything that's real. That's something that should be rejected. Now, you don't have to necessarily be upset about it, okay? Like I said, there's various forms of Salafism. They can go different ways. So go to the next slide. So you can be, the Salafis of Egypt in particular, there's a huge branch of Salafis that are quietist, that don't want to be involved in politics at all. They want to stay at home. They want to be left alone. They want to do their own thing. They have their own imam that they follow, their own cleric that they follow, and otherwise they're minding their own business. They're not involved in anything else. Others, and they actually think it's wrong to be politically involved. And then there's a second camp, a smaller camp that's political. That political camp is saying, yes, we should be involved because the country's going to be voting. There's democracy now. We have to be involved. We have to be active. We have to be involved. We have to be political. We don't have to be violent. We don't have to sit in our house and pray for good things. We have to get out in the world and act. So there's another camp of that. And then there's a smaller camp that says, no, that's not enough. We can't just be political. We have to be doing something. We have to be willing to be violent to achieve our goals. And that's where you get the jihadi camp. And each one of these is smaller than the previous. In fact, the jihadi camp is the smallest camp, okay, by far the smallest, okay? So, next one. Just to give you an idea of where this goes, you have the Salafi teaching. Again, it can go populist, where you get involved, you organize your people, et cetera, but you do different things. You stay quietist. You basically just don't want to rock the boat, but you still do social networking. You still do social justice, do things like this, social things for your community. You raise money. You give money to charities, et cetera, et cetera. That's kind of that strain, but that's still a Salafi strain. It's still a puritanical strain. You could also go into the activist populist, which is more like politically active. You form a political party. You get out in the world. You run for elections, but you're, again, not violent. And then the other way, which the main teaching on the other side is the Wahhabi teaching, which began in the 1920s or even a little earlier and then ramped up. And Muslim Brotherhood came out of that teaching, but is actually branched away from it. But anyway, the Wahhabist teaching can take you different ways. It could take you to an Islamist, basically Islamist, which is Saudi Arabia, is Wahhabist, but not by definition jihadist. But it is Islamist in the sense that it prefers Islam to all others. It prefers its version of Islam to all others. You should all come to our version of Islam, but we're not going to shoot you for it. Okay? Whereas the other way you go to the Wahhabis is you go to the jihadis, and that's Al-Qaeda. Okay? That's how you get there. Okay? And we could go into great detail, but we don't have time. So, go to the next slide. And this is enough. So this is the Sinai. We're going to go into the Sinai a little bit here because I want to show you what's happening on the ground there. Again, we're going to go through this pretty quick. This is the Sinai. It's about 23,000 square miles peninsula. It's basically the size of West Virginia. And all of this area was once taken over by Israel and then given back after the 70th War in the treaty. So Israel was once here and now has pushed back, and that border is now the border of Israel. Since 81, that's been the border. Okay, so go to the next slide. There are two basic states here, North Sinai, South Sinai. These are basically the municipal states. They each have their own capital. Sharm el-Sheikh is one capital. Arish in the north is the capital of the north. Go to the next. And this is the area we're going to kind of zero in on because this is where most of the violence has been happening. So go in there. Go to the next. Yeah. So this is kind of the center of that area. Jabal al-Halal, Wadi Amir. These are areas, these are literally like 20 miles from the Israel border. Okay. Arish is 28 miles from the border of Rafah, which is the Israel crossing right there. So that's like 28-mile difference. Swarka, Ramaliyat, Tarabin, these are the tribes. These are the Bedouin tribes that exist in that area and range across that area. They made a lot of money on the smuggling of the tunnels into Gaza, and they were benefited by that, but at the same time they also reject a lot of the jihadi teaching that comes into their area. So they are Salafis in some ways, but they are not jihadis. And the majority of the Bedouin are actually Sunni, or like Sufi, like traditional Muslims, traditional Sunni Muslims. Some percentage of that are Salafis, and some percentage of that have become jihadis, but maybe only 1% of the total Bedouin population. So go to the next. So what's been happening, we zoom in again. Sheikh Zuwaid is a holy shrine. The arrows right there are where the tunnel system was, but the army has shut that down and closed it off, but that was where that was happening. You've heard about it in the news. And the Rafah crossing there was the Rafah crossing that was the main Rafah crossing to Gaza and Egypt. Keren Shalom is the crossing from Gaza into Israel, and that's where Israel allows all goods and materials to transfer through Keren Shalom. It's a very, very, very heavily guarded area. And then the explosion there you see is where there was a group of terrorists that killed a bunch of Egyptian soldiers, took over their APV, and drove it into Israel across the border to Keren Shalom, and that's where that happened. And that was back in 2012 when that happened. And so that was another reason that brought urgency to the idea of closing the border of Israel, is to build some kind of fence along that border. So go to the next slide. And so what has happened here is this is where the jihadis were mainly digging in the Sinai, this sort of area. And this is where the Egyptian army has come in a very serious way, targeted the jihadis, and shut them down. Now, here's the problem. The Egyptian army has screwed this up. They've really made a mess of this. They've made all kinds of problems with this. They are indiscriminately violent. They raid the homes of villagers who had nothing to do with this. They go in and steal someone's television, and they loot homes. They do all kinds of things like this on just ad hoc. There's very little discipline. It's really, in some places, really bad. In other places, they're very disciplined. But basically, they go into an area. Let's say a terrorist, an Al-Qaeda guy, or one of these groups in the Sinai, one of these jihadis in Sinai, attacks an outpost, a military outpost. And he throws a bomb or he shoots a gun at the outpost, and he runs away. Well, he runs to a certain village. They find out where he went. They all go back home. They drive out the next day. They drive a bunch of tanks down there, and they shell the village. And maybe if they know the exact home he was at, they'll burn the home down. Then they go home. They drive all their tanks back, and they park them, and they go in for the night. They're not actually taking this on as a clearing. They're not doing counterinsurgency. They're not handling this correctly, and they're very frustrated. They're more and more frustrated by their inability to get a handle on this, but at the same time, they're actually doing a very bad job of it. So they're actually creating a situation where Bedouin, who are by and large, the Bedouin of the Sinai are by and large neutral, are actually in some ways being driven toward the jihadi camp because they're all being treated like they're jihadis. Okay? So this is a problem for the future. It's a problem for next year, but it's a problem. So go on to the next one. And I will say they have done good things. They shut down those tunnels. That was very important. Okay? So I'm going to stop and do real quick Egypt questions, or we can wait till the end. Okay. So we'll do Iran. Okay, so real quick here, we're going to rush through Iran here. So overarching all of what I've just said, for Israel in particular, they have a threat. Okay, we now know Israel has a threat of Lebanon crumbling. We have a threat of Syria continuing to crumble. We have the threat of Jordan being destabilized by the sheer weight of the refugees and the kind of the inefficient government that they have. And we have Egypt completely at sea with its own people and with its own jihadi problem and its own crushing debt, which we didn't get into, but it's horrific. Egypt is completely broke. So all of those problems are on Israel's borders. But overarching all of those problems is this problem. And this is the Syrian footprint, the rising influence of Iran, the triumphalism, the strident, bold attitude of Iran right now is truly remarkable and has gotten everybody very, very worried. So we have the Syrian footprint, we have Hezbollah, we have Iraq, which has been completely destabilized by Iran. And Maliki, the president there, is very much doing whatever Iran asks of him for the most part. So he's basically in the Iran camp. And then we have this quest by Iran for a nuclear program, nuclear weapon. So as you can see, the program is scattered. Qom, Iraq, Natanz, Bushehr, they're all scattered. It's very difficult to take this out. In '81, when Israel took out the Iraq nuclear program, which we should all be glad they did, because if not, Saddam would have had nuclear weapons. So it's good that that was taken out in '81. And now we have a situation where Israel might have to do this again, but it's not just one site. It's all these, or a lot of these. Okay? Iraq, by the way, is a heavy water reactor. It's being built, but it's a plutonium reactor. Now, they say this is a civilian program. There's no civilian use for plutonium. Okay? That doesn't exist. So if they're building a heavy water reactor, they're building a nuclear program for weapons. Okay? Period. And there's a lot of other things like that. But this is where we are. Go to the next slide. So click on the next. I want to do this really quick. Sunni-Shia divide here. This is the corridor I was talking about. This is the Tehran to Beirut, or Tehran to Hezbollah corridor that Iran is so desperate to protect, so desperate to maintain, that's so important to them as their worldview. This is the thing they're trying to do. This is why they want the nuclear program. It's why they want, because they want to protect this sphere of control. Go to the next. This is the Sunni corridor, or Sunni sphere, if you will. It connects Egypt to Jordan, down to part of Iraq, down to Kuwait, and down to Bahrain, Qatar, and the UAE. All these are the Sunni powers that are becoming arrayed, usually behind Saudi leadership, with Qatar also being a rising star, if you will, in that constellation. But all of this is the Sunni sphere. This is the Sunnis showing this is our territory. That's what Bahrain was about. Saudi basically invaded Bahrain to protect that from going over to the Shia side. That was what that was about. This is how they see the world. This is very much part of what they see. And this is basically, at the moment, this is basically static in the sense that no side can, it's not static, it's the wrong word because it's actually quite volatile, but it's basically give and take. Neither side can push the other side too far. But as you can see, Syria, in this matrix, Syria is a Sunni majority country, okay, controlled by the Shia, as a center of the Shia arc. You can imagine how important Syria is for both sides. They both have to win in Syria. The Saudi Sunni pitch, whatever the Islamic front that they've now got going there, that's their vanguard. And Iran is fully invested with the IRGC and the Hezbollah and all that in their Syria model. Both sides are at war in Syria with this Sunni Shia thing. And again, it's not about the religion in this case, it's about power, it's about the control. It's about the future of both countries. So, go to the next. So again, there's a Shia corridor, go to the next. I think I just did this as clicks. Yeah. Now, again, I said, this is basically, yeah, that's fine. basically this is equal. As I said, this is basically a détente, or basically it can go either way little by little, but nothing's going to push either side one way or the other until you see this Iranian nuclear program or a Saudi nuclear program. Saudis are very close to the Pakistanis. Pakistanis already have one. Okay? So this could go other ways, but Iran is definitely concerned about this. This is where they are. This is what they want. They feel it as absolutely essential to their survival. And the Saudis feel it's essential to their survival that Iran doesn't get it. Okay? So, because they're not absolutely sure they could get one from Pakistan. They might be able to work out that deal, but it's not automatic. It'd be very difficult for them to make that sell. Pakistan would have to really think about it. There's no guarantee that would work or that would go down that way. So they don't want Iran to get it. That's the better solution. Okay? So they're working very hard with us, with everyone, to prevent this situation from the Iranian nuke. So we talked beginning of this, I'll wrap up here, and then I'll take as many questions as you want. But we talked about this being pray for the peace of Jerusalem. That's the theme here. Well, I want to kind of reiterate that and reinforce that. Go to the next slide. Just click through these. We have instability in Lebanon. We have Hezbollah and Al-Qaeda fighting. That could destabilize Lebanon. We have a civil war in Syria that's already destabilized. It's already a failed state, and it's not going to be one failed state. It's going to be many. And they're all going to be competing, and they're all going to be on Israel's border. We have instability in Jordan. We have economic and security problems in Jordan. That could destabilize the country of Jordan. We have crisis in Egypt, economic, political, and security. And we have Al-Qaeda in the Sinai. We now have Iran. We also have Iran. On top of all of this, we have Iran's pursuit of a nuclear weapon. We have a refugee crisis out of control. All of this is what Israel faces in the coming year on her borders or looming overhead. So when we say pray for the peace of Jerusalem, pray earnestly. This is the world they face. And I think there's been way too much made about the relationship, if you will, between the United States, President of the United States, and the Prime Minister of Israel, and that there's tensions there and whatever. Well, when the Prime Minister of Israel looks out the window, he sees this. And when the President looks out the window, he sees something different, and he has different priorities, and that's going to come up. But there's no doubt in my mind that this remains a very strong priority for the President of the United States, and he is not unaware of any of this. So it's not about the tensions you may have heard or about U.S. and America. That's not it. That's not what this is. The United States' relationship with Israel is very strong, and we want to pray for it to remain strong. But it's also about these security threats that are real, everyday threats on Israel's borders. You're going to hear about the Israel-Palestinian. That's a whole other level of situation that's happening right now on the ground, and a whole other investment by the United States. But these are the things, the security threats, strategic threats. Every single one of these, in fact, the Iran one is an existential threat. But every single other of these is a strategic threat, meaning what? Meaning that Israel will have to commit national assets to adjust its entire security posture to address any one of these. And they have all four, plus Iran. So it's a major year for Israel. It's a very disturbing environment and for Israel, and yet it's there, and it's thriving, and it definitely needs our prayers. So I'll close with that. I'm happy to take more questions offline.
Can we ask a question? Give me a quick.
No, go ahead.
I just have a quick question. My name is Monique Roll. First of all, thank you for all of your expertise. But just moving forward, I know you weren't able to touch on everything, but what do you recommend for recommended readings or just something to gain like a general perspective?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite
What do you recommend for us so we can continue to keep up or read more about these things? I know there's a lot of information out there.
Yeah, I'll have to think about that.
Think about that. Okay.
Find me after.
Okay.
That's a longer answer than I can do, yeah. Go ahead. Or you?
Speak into the mic and
Yeah.
please give us your name.
All right.
Speak into the mic.
My name is Barakat Stefanos. My name is Barakat Stefanos. I live in Alexandria, but I'm originally from Eritrea. And I want to follow up one of the questions that was raised about the African refugees in Israel, because according to the statistics I read, there are around 60,000 refugees in Israel, and almost 35,000 of them are from Eritrea.
Yeah.
And I know I have family members, part of them. And what is happening, like, just to give you a background of Eritrea, it's just called a country, the North Korea of Africa. If you just Google the word, it will show up Eritrea. The rest of the refugees are from South Sudan.
Right.
And the government of Israel, that what's giving them as an option is to send them back to their countries or to keep them in a prison for an unlimited period of time in the Negev desert. And this is what is starting the protests that has been going on for the last week, and it's being unresolved. And that's a law. And there were some harsh words from the government officials of Israel. And if we look at it from the presentation today, the problems surrounding Israel are real. But what can be done from the government side, from the Israel government's point of view, because these are real people given an option to go to a civil war in South Sudan or to a dictatorial government in Eritrea or to stay in prison for an indefinite period of time.
Right.
And I just want to hear your opinion about this. Thank you.
Well, I would say my opinion is pretty close to your own. Look, I'm not an Israeli official. I don't work for that government. I don't defend that government. I'm here to say that Israel has a big problem with this, and they have to deal with it, and they're going to have to take it seriously. And the protests are quite, I mean, that's what's going to happen. If you do things like this, there are going to be protests. I will say that I will trust Israel to try to do the right thing. Now, there's a famous Winston Churchill quote about the United States that Americans always do the right thing, they try everything else first. And sometimes I feel that way sometimes about Israel. Sometimes they don't figure it out right away how to fix this. But I do believe, I strongly believe, there are a lot of people in Israel that care about this issue, that want it to be resolved. There are Israelis that are going to speak up and complain about it if the government doesn't get it right. And I think it will be resolved. And I will guarantee you that it will be resolved better than any other state in the region would resolve it. Somehow they will deal with it. And they'll deal with it as fairly as they can afford to. Yeah.
Let me just say, in the interest of time, Mr. Harris has given us his time this morning, and certainly we know that there are possibly many questions that you desire to ask of him, but because we know the sanctuary does have to be cleared and it has to be clean for the service this evening, I'm going to ask you to be mindful of your questions, and we want to limit it to only the people who are standing. There will be no other questions asked of Mr. Harris except for the people who are now standing. And I thank you for being considerate, because we do want to thank him for the stellar service that he has given us today and this wonderful presentation. He has done an outstanding job, and we're thankful to God, to him, for his service here today. And the time that he was to be with us was until 12 o'clock. And certainly, if we listen to 5, 6, 7, 8 more questions, he would be here until 1 o'clock. And I'm not going to let that happen. I'm very sorry. So I see the gentleman, you were not standing at the time, and so you cannot ask that question. I'm very sorry. So we're going to take your question. 2 questions. I'm sorry.
Ma'am, he was standing, and because he was behind me, and then he sat down.
I have to make a decision. Pastor Wesley has left me in charge. I'm Director of Christian Ed, and we got to do it this way. I'm very sorry, but we have to take these questions and do it expediently. We have to value his time as well. Thank you for being considerate.
Thank you. So my name, Michael. You already did one.
I understand and appreciate your perspective as far as the organization you represent, but in the Bible, when David impregnated Bathsheba and killed her husband and then took her as his wife, God sent Nathan to speak to David by telling him a story, and David got so upset about what he heard, but Nathan was really talking about David. So I guess my question is, who is going to be Israel's current day Nathan? Because I think sometimes Israel only see things from a certain perspective and don't try to look at other perspective. Israel have been trying to find a homeland. They did. Now the Palestinians also want a homeland. At what point do they say, I understand how they feel. Everyone wants this sense of security and belonging. And I think this is prime time for Israel to sort of, it may sound like a negative word, but exploit what's going on with the instability. I think it's an opportunity for them to probably step back and say, let's take a different approach in conjunction with the United States, because the reality is the United States is a great supporter of Israel. And, right, okay. Okay, right. So don't you think it's in Israel's best interest to use this opportunity to definitely shed a more positive light, and turning away refugees may not be a positive thing, but also to, again, to present a positive light. So what's the question? Do you think Israel should be doing something different as far as their approach?
Okay. You're going to talk for all next week about Israel-Palestinians. So that's one thing. But I will say this. The Palestinian question is a question for the entire Middle East, and the entire Middle East is part of the problem. The Arab states that have kept this alive is also part of the problem. Israel is certainly going to have to deal with this. It's not going away. They're going to have to figure out how to deal with it. I think the biggest problem for Israel moving forward right now, and again, I do not speak for that government. I do not advise that government. I would say that the biggest problem they have right now is the Palestinian leadership of Abbas is also hampered by Hamas. And if you make a deal right now, if you make a deal and you get everything you want for the Palestinians, can Abbas actually deliver on those promises? What will Hamas enter into that agreement? Hamas controls literally half, the majority actually, of the Palestinian people in Gaza. Are the Gazans automatically party to an agreement that is signed by Abbas? So these are legal conundrums that Israel finds itself in with regards to the Palestinian process that are right now front and center in the Israel mindset. And I guarantee you that the Israeli public will move forward with a peace deal, almost any peace deal, that includes their security in it. And that security is not guaranteed in an agreement with Hamas, an organization designed to destroy the state. Yeah.
Keith Moore, and I just want to say, for the sake of not only this tremendous conversation, but you've talked to a believing people. You've talked to a church who knows how to pray. And I believe that what we've now been informed and educated in so many ways, maybe even first time, I think this is historic to have a church, black church, understand as much as we have today about the Middle East and the various countries. So we now know what to pray for, and we believe,
and there's a lot.
We believe that our God is universal, global, international, and can do all things. And so, however long it takes, that might be
Right.
that's up to God. However, we do see more information pouring into us, more prayers, I believe, that will come from this church, and I think you will see some changes, and I look forward to next week.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Hi, George Scott. First, I was fortunate enough to actually visit Saudi as well as the UAE, and it's just fascinating. But my question is, more than half the leaders that you talked about are considered some of the richest individuals, not only in their countries, but in the world, including Putin, Assad. Right. And I have to believe some of that comes from some U.S. interests. So are we fighting ourselves? Like you gave the example of Assad and, the oil or the crude going back and, doing things. Are we fighting ourselves dealing with the Middle East? Thank you.
Well, this is a big kind of strategic thinking type question. You know, the United States has had a relationship with Saudi Arabia post-World War II. It's been a very, very important strategic relationship for the United States. But yes, there's a lot of critique there too. We all know 19 of the hijackers were Saudi nationals, et cetera, et cetera. We know that Wahhabism that is cultivated and incubated in Saudi, the Wahhabism there was the genesis of Al-Qaeda, was the mother's milk of Osama bin Laden. We know there are problems with this relationship that have not been fully dealt with. But I will say that I think this Iranian crisis, to kind of, I'm not dodging your question, but I'm kind of taking a slice of it. The Iranian threat that is posed to Saudi right now has also woken the Saudis up to the fact that they need us, and they need to maybe play better with us and care more about our interests, maybe a little more, and see us as an essential ally instead of just a convenient one. Things like this. So I think that thinking could be changing, but I also think that the Saudis are panicked about these negotiations that are going on between the United States and Iran, and the EU and Iran. This is something that has the Saudis very worried. So I think inasmuch as we are maybe hurting ourselves or whatever, there's a definite sense that the Saudi relationship needs to be looked at more closely and scrutinized more closely about what it's actually doing. But I personally feel that it remains a deeply important strategic relationship for the U.S. But I do think we need to hold them more to account for some of the things they are doing. Now, Assad is someone we should have thrown under the bus a long time ago. And we basically did that, but that was one of the reasons he got so in bed with Iran was because he had no other way to go. There was a definite movement in this country right when President Obama took office. There was a lot of outreach done to Assad to try to bring him over to get him out of the radical camp and into the U.S. camp, and he just flatly refused. He would string us along and he would back off. He would string us along and back off. So there have been overtures along this line to try to change that calculus, but they haven't yet borne fruit. Yeah.
Thank you again for the information that
Sure.
you provided. And I realize some of my questions can wait till next week. So with that being said, my name is Evie Isles, and thanks. My name is Evie, and I wanted to know, you talked about the feeling of these countries towards, or even the history of how these countries have a problem with Israel or with the Jewish state.
Mm-hmm.
Can you shed any more light right now on why on why, and that's it.
I don't want to, this is a tough one because I'm going to be making some blanket statements, and as they say, blanket statements are always wrong, even that one. I think that it's a problem, but there is a real deep problem in the Arab world, in the Muslim world, with anti-Semitism. There is just a deep-rooted anti-Semitism that is taught from cradle to grave. The average Arab student, for better or for worse, and the origins of this we could debate, but right now, for better or for worse, the average Arab or average Muslim in the world today is taught to hate the Jews, to hate Israel from the moment they can speak and talk and learn anything. And that is something that needs to be scrutinized deeply by Muslims who don't agree with that. I think Muslims who don't agree with that teaching and want to challenge that teaching need to take it on. But that has not happened in any sort of major scale. That in every single, I can give you this one, this is a true blank statement. There is not a single Islamic terrorist organization in the world today, or terror brigade or anything, that does not have as core part of their teaching the destruction of Israel and the killing of Jews. Not one. So if they are Islamic jihadist or Wahhabist and go to jihadism, they take with them an anti-Semitism. Now, where they grab that anti-Semitism from, I don't know, and that should be discussed and debated and discovered, because it's different for each one. But every single one of them grabs a hold of a hatred of the state of Israel and a hatred of Jews. And they take it with them to the jihad. And so right now we have al-Qaeda waging war in Syria against Assad, but when that's done, then they can take on the real problem, which is Israel. This is the teaching, this is the thinking. And I have not found, and I've looked, I have not found any sort of even mildly like Salafi thinking that actually justifies this or defends this. You know, there's no actual real, like we Christians, we would say scriptural. There's no scriptural basis for this. Okay, even within the Quran. I mean, there's a couple little passages, but I mean they're small, they're fleeting, they're not doctrinal. Okay, so it's very strange for me. It's something I question a lot about. Where did this anti-Semitism come from? Why is it so deeply rooted? It's like a mass psychosis. It's really striking, and it's just profoundly, and it's a profound problem, and it needs to be truly investigated and thought about by believing Muslims. Believing Muslims need to take that on. So, yeah.
Greetings. I just wanted to mention that Al Jazeera America is a worldwide news program that people can watch if they want to get a broad view and a more in-depth view of what's going on in the world, and especially in the Middle East. And it's branched off from the original Al Jazeera news, but it's Al Jazeera America, and it's 114 on Fios Verizon.
Okay. Thank you. And thank you all very much.